Hey guys, tonight we're strapping ourselves into a corset so tight it could double as a tourniquet, and waltzing straight into the scandalously uncomfortable world of Victorian London's beauty standards for women, and especially for wives. We're talking about a time when looking good wasn't just a hobby. It was basically a full-contact sport, with the dress code enforced by both society and a deep-rooted fear of ankles. So before you let your hair down, because in Victorian London someone would definitely judge you for that, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this kind of historical self-torture. And let me know in the comments, are you listening from a place with actual indoor plumbing? Is it past midnight? Are you currently wearing pants with a waistband that allows for breathing? Because tonight, you're going to need some room. Go ahead, dim the lights, put on a fan, and get as comfortable as possible, preferably in pajamas, not 12 layers of linen, whalebone, and existential dread. Now, let's take a moment to ask the big questions. Have you ever wondered what it takes to achieve the perfect Victorian silhouette? Could you survive a day in a dress that requires a support team just to get into? Did women really faint that much? Or were they just using it as an excuse to escape awkward conversations? How did anyone keep their skin so pale when there was coal smoke, horse manure, and possibly a neighbor's cat in the air at all times? Did you have to choose between a clean face and a healthy set of lungs? Was resting faint face just a medical condition? Or a Victorian party trick? And, of course, the ultimate question. If you woke up tomorrow as a Victorian wife, would you thrive? Or would you be immediately arrested for showing your wrists in public? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1862, in the middle of London, surrounded by more lace, hair oil, and social pressure than a modern reality TV reunion. Your waist is now 17 inches, your hair weighs more than your head, and someone is definitely judging your eyebrows. Good luck. The day begins with a gasp, literally. Victorian women wake up under a mountain of blankets, bonnets, and the constant dread that someone might see them before they've had a chance to powder their nose. Forget morning yoga. Your first task is making sure your nightcap hasn't left creases on your forehead that could ruin your entire social standing. Oh, and don't even ask about toothpaste, unless you count baking soda, coal dust, or wishful thinking. Let's set the scene. The fire has long since died in the grate. The room smells faintly of mothballs and unresolved issues, and your breath steams in the frigid London air. Your first waking sensation is the slight panic that comes from realizing your hair has staged a rebellion in the night. It's now plastered in a tragic halo against your cheeks, thanks, humidity, and your silk nightcap, intended to prevent precisely this, has slipped sideways in a silent act of betrayal. Somewhere nearby, a clock chimes 6. You're expected to look as if you awoke gently, like a woodland nymph, and not like someone who just lost a wrestling match with a tangle of linen. Every moment is high stakes. Your maid could burst in at any second, ready to throw open the curtains and expose you to the one thing worse than daylight: scrutiny. You take stock of your surroundings, noting the neat row of morning bonnets arranged for every possible social emergency. Yes, even grief comes with a dress code. There's one for breakfast, one for light mourning, one for heavy, world-ending sadness, just in case Queen Victoria herself stops by to see how well you're suffering. Each bonnet is laced with enough ribbon to strangle a small dog and features so much black crepe that the dust in the air develops its own emotional baggage. Now, you consider your breath. Victorians didn't have the luxury of spearmint gel, so your options are more rustic. The recommended solution? Baking soda if you're fashionable, or burnt bread crusts if you're frugal. Some ladies keep a tiny box of charcoal on the nightstand for quick brushing, a practice that promises whitening but mostly just leaves you with teeth that crunch ominously until noon. If you're feeling especially bold, you might rinse with salt water, which both stings and doubles as a warning to anyone standing too close at breakfast. You fumble for your powder box, desperate to tame the early morning bloom that, in Victorian circles, just means looking slightly less like a boiled beet. Cold water splashed on your face is supposed to tighten the pores, revive your complexion, and shock you into full consciousness. In reality, it mostly causes you to yelp and spook the family cat. Of course, you're doing this all in the half-dark, because being caught in full morning disarray is the social equivalent of posting a photo without a filter, scandalous, reckless, and impossible to delete. Next comes the ritual of presenting oneself. You practice a serene, slightly mournful expression in the mirror. Never too happy, as genuine joy before breakfast is seen as a medical emergency. Shoulders back, hands folded, and bonnet perched just so. You're ready for anything the day might throw at you. A surprise visitor, a neighbor's child in distress, or another round of competitive mourning with your mother-in-law. There's no such thing as me time. Your first minutes awake are already public property. The house hums with movement, servants laying the fire, the scullery maid clattering dishes, someone, definitely not you, polishing boots in the hallway. Your privacy is thinner than the gruel you'll be expected to eat later. But don't worry. By the time you make it to breakfast, you've survived Victorian beauty's earliest obstacle course. You're properly bonneted, breath somewhat neutralized, and, if you're lucky, have managed not to weep openly about the hair dent dividing your forehead. Welcome to another day of being a Victorian wife. Awake, alert, and already exhausted by the effort of existing. Before breakfast, it's time for the most important ritual. Strapping yourself into a corset tight enough to realign your internal organs. With the help of a maid, or two if you're unlucky, you're laced up until you can't decide if you're lightheaded from the compression or the anticipation of another exciting day of not breathing properly. The Victorian silhouette waits for no one. Let's be honest. This is not your average morning stretch. There's no gentle yoga, no downward dog, just a complex piece of underwear engineered to make your waist look like a polite afterthought. Your first challenge is the busk, a rigid strip of whalebone or steel down the front of the corset, cold enough to shock even your most determined internal organs into submission. It takes teamwork, determination, and occasionally the kind of language your grandmother warned you about. As your maid begins the process, you cling to the bedpost for support, practicing the ancient art of pretend this is totally fine. The laces tighten in stages. First, you can still speak. Then, you can only whisper. Finally, you achieve the coveted state of barely audible sighs. If you can still sneeze without seeing stars, you're doing it wrong. Victorian fashion didn't just demand a tiny waist, it demanded the illusion of fragility. Corseting was a daily, literal squeeze play. A competitive sport where the scoreboard was measured in inches and the stakes were the difference between social glory and being mistaken for someone's aunt from the countryside. The goal? A waist so small that, when viewed from above, you'd cast the shadow of a particularly determined hourglass. The sensation is hard to describe. Your ribs are suddenly best friends. Your stomach is somewhere in the vicinity of your spine, and your spleen is sending out carrier pigeons for help. The compression is impressive. You feel taller, more upright, and suspiciously like you might faint if you try to sit down too quickly. If you manage to make it down the stairs without losing consciousness, you've already conquered most of your daily fitness goals. Modern shapewear has nothing on Victorian engineering. Corsets were constructed with steel boning, reinforced seams, and enough eyelets to lace a ship's rigging. They were designed to withstand the pressures of society and soup. Some days, you could squeeze down a full 4 inches from your natural waist, at least until you tried to eat something more substantial than a sigh and a cup of weak tea. This wasn't a one-size-fits-all operation. There were morning corsets, evening corsets, health corsets for the delicate flower who still wanted to be able to blink, and even maternity corsets. because nothing says support like gently herding your vital organs northward while 8 months pregnant. Each style came with its own set of promises and threats. Of course, every woman claimed her waist was naturally small, as if tight lacing had nothing to do with it, and she just happened to be built like a willow sapling. In reality, there was a network of back-alley corset dealers, strategic lacing tutorials, and whispered tips about how to breathe shallowly and faint convincingly at social functions, because nothing showed true femininity like being only one polite cough away from toppling over in a dead swoon. Corseting wasn't just fashion, it was performance art. Drawing the laces was as much about signaling discipline, control, and marital eligibility as it was about shape. If your waist could fit through a wedding ring, rumor had it you could marry up a social class. If you could fit through a keyhole, you might as well skip to Duchess. But at the end of the day, after hours of standing tall, sipping soup, and suppressing the urge to sneeze, you could finally loosen the laces. The relief was immediate, the posture gone, and the organs began their slow, grateful journey back to where nature probably intended. Congratulations, you've survived another morning in Victorian London, waist cinched, spleen relocated, and ready to greet the day's endless expectations with nothing but a carefully measured breath and the faint, lingering hope that someday fashion will choose comfort over compression. But don't hold your breath, you couldn't if you tried. In Victorian London, tan skin meant you actually did things, and that's not fashionable. The ideal is skin so pale you could be cast as a friendly ghost. Achieving this look requires a toolkit of lead-based powders, vinegar rinses, and avoiding sunlight as if it's radioactive. Bonus points if people ask if you're feeling well at every social event. Let's start with your morning routine, which is less about waking up refreshed and more about convincing the world you're halfway to Victorian sainthood. The first step is a brisk face wash with rainwater or vinegar. If you're feeling fancy, maybe even milk. The sensation is what you'd expect: bracing, faintly sour, and possibly a little sticky. If your face feels numb, you're on the right track. Next comes a brisk inspection in the mirror to check for signs of health. Red cheeks are immediately suspect. There are entire novels worth of advice on how to suppress the flush. Should you accidentally betray circulation, a quick dab of powder will render you safely cadaverous again. You then reach for your face powder, which the best beauty authorities assure you is perfectly safe. Never mind the lead, arsenic, or random bits of chalk it contains. You press it into your skin, holding your breath so as not to inhale enough toxic dust to set off the fire alarm. The goal is a finish that is not merely pale but matte and opaque. If people are asking when your last meal was, you know you've nailed it. If anyone suspects you've recently walked outside, back to the powder mines you go. But wait, there's more. The truly dedicated Victorian pursuer of beauty knows that skincare isn't just a morning affair. You'll need to top up throughout the day. A discreet pat of powder here, a flick of rice flour there, always making sure your complexion remains as even as a fresh sheet and about as lively. There are even portable vials of vinegar for on-the-go facial rinsing. Forget face mists. Victorian women are out here spritzing themselves with salad dressing, all in the name of not looking weathered. And heaven help you if you catch the sun. The mere thought of a tan is enough to send you into a spiral of existential dread. The outdoors is for gardeners and the help. Your job is to look as if you've never done a hard day's work in your life. That means sun hats with brims the size of small canoes, parasols at the ready, and strategic lurking in the shadows like a fashionable bat. Sometimes, fashionable ladies would even stay inside during summer afternoons, composing letters about how little they'd accomplished that day and how grateful they were for the latest shipment of face bleach. Victorian remedies for uncooperative skin ran the gamut from the simply unfortunate to the downright alarming. Do you have freckles? Time to bleach them with lemon juice or ammonia. Are you suffering from a stubborn pimple? Try a dab of mercury, or perhaps a prayer. There are recipes circulating for everything: water of youth, lily lotion, and arsenic wafers, the latter giving you that luminous, nearly transparent glow that doubles as a warning label. The side effects? Unexplained fainting, headaches, and a sort of gentle disintegration around the edges. If you weren't suffering for your looks, were you really doing it right? Women boasted of their commitment to paleness like a badge of honor. Yes, I've had a cough all winter, but look how even my skin is. In the end, achieving the corpse glow is less about beauty and more about endurance. You spend your day avoiding windows, layering on toxins, and perfecting a look that says, I might die at any moment, but at least I'll look ethereal doing it. Welcome to Victorian skincare. The only beauty standard where, are you feeling ill, dear? Is the highest compliment you can receive. Breakfast is a delicate affair. Weak tea, crumbly toast, and maybe a slice of orange if you're feeling wild. But don't get too excited. Rumor has it some beauty remedies involved actual arsenic, because who doesn't want to risk organ failure for luminous skin? Eat up, and remember, fainting is optional, but encouraged. Let's set the scene. You sit down at the table, bleary-eyed, in a starched morning dress that feels roughly as comfortable as sleeping in a tent made of origami. The table is set with delicate china and exactly 12 different implements, none of which can actually make the toast any less like eating a brittle piece of shrapnel. Your tea arrives, steeped to the strength of puddle water and the color of mild disappointment. Sugar is strictly rationed, unless you're trying to impress company, in which case you use it liberally and then immediately feel guilty about your extravagant ways for the rest of the week. The toast, meanwhile, is an exercise in Victorian stoicism. It's more of a test than a treat. If it doesn't crack a tooth, it's considered underdone. Butter is a luxury. Jam is a social event. And marmalade is basically forbidden fruit unless you have an uncle in the import business. There's always the chance of a solitary egg, boiled until it could bounce down the street and still hold its shape, or perhaps a whisper of kipper if you're feeling very robust and unconcerned about the lingering after effects for the next 12 hours. Now, if you're aspiring to that extra level of beauty and social mystique, your breakfast might also include some remedies recommended by the day's most influential magazines. The Victorians never met a dangerous chemical they couldn't market as a cosmetic. Arsenic wafers, for instance, were actually advertised as a path to radiant, snow-white skin. Take one with breakfast and you, too, could glow with the unmistakable aura of someone who's just ingested a controlled substance. If arsenic feels a bit much for a Monday, you might try vinegar in your tea or swallow a bit of chalk for that desirable digestive distress. It's wellness, Victorian style. The more uncomfortable, the more effective. And don't think fruit will save you. An orange slice is a rare and precious jewel, probably shipped in from somewhere sunny and far, far away. You might get one on a good day, arranged neatly atop your toast as a reminder of all the nutrition you're not getting. Scurvy isn't just for sailors, after all. But beware, enjoying too much fruit is vaguely frowned upon. Anything that gives you energy or color in your cheeks is cause for concern and possibly a doctor's visit. There's no bacon, of course. Fat is the enemy. And you're not trying to look prosperous. You're aiming for delicate, not hearty. So you sip your tea, gnaw your toast, and try not to faint before noon. Fainting, by the way, is always in style. The combination of a corset, lack of calories, and a deep existential dread about being seen without your gloves means that losing consciousness at breakfast is practically a rite of passage. The table conversation is subdued, but never silent. Someone is always coughing delicately into a handkerchief, discussing the weather in 3 separate tenses, or commenting on the tragic abundance of smog. If you're dining with family, there might be an awkward silence as everyone contemplates the toast. If you're alone, you can listen to the reassuring clatter of the maid, who is probably dreaming of the bacon you're not allowed to have. At the end of this gentle morning ordeal, you rise slowly, wondering if your stomach will rebel or if you'll make it through another day on a breakfast that wouldn't satisfy a Victorian cat. Still, you're perfectly pale, fashionably faint, and ready to face the demands of beauty, etiquette, and the daily marathon of not passing out in public. Congratulations. That was breakfast. Time to get dressed for battle. Victorian hair is no joke. Achieving the required shiny waterfall with bonus sausage curls means an hour with hot tongs, bare grease, and enough hair oil to fry a potato. If you're lucky, you'll get through the day without igniting yourself on a gas lamp or losing a comb in the tangles. Let's begin with the raw material. Your hair, which in an ideal world would grow in thick, glossy sheets, tumbling over your shoulders like the world's most impractical cape. In reality, it's more likely to be halfway between brushed by angels and slept on by raccoons. No matter, Victorian beauty manuals are full of hopeful advice. Step 1 is brushing. You start with a boar bristle brush and a silent prayer, working through knots that have formed alliances during the night. You tug, you wince, you try to remember if you updated your will. Now it's time for the oils. A glossy sheen is a moral imperative, according to your Aunt Edith, who smells permanently of lavender pomade. You rub a concoction of macassar oil, castor oil, or whatever you can afford, sometimes even leftover bacon grease in a pinch, between your palms and work it through your locks. Instantly, your hair achieves that highly desirable reflective puddle effect. Unfortunately, your pillowcases and collars are now ruined forever. There's a reason Victorian sofas had those little lace doilies on the back. They're not decorative. They're a desperate attempt to save the upholstery from all that oil. Next comes the main event: curling. The sausage curl is the height of fashion. So you heat up a pair of iron tongs over the fire, say goodbye to your fingerprints, and get to work. There's an art to it. Wait too long, and you'll fry your hair to a crisp. Too little, and you'll look like a startled sheep. The tongs are hot, your nerves are frayed, and the smell of singed keratin lingers in the air like a warning from the ghost of hairstyles past. You divide your hair into sections, rolling, pinning, waiting, unrolling. Each curl is an act of faith. If you're not careful, one false move and you'll wind up with the Victorian equivalent of a perm gone rogue. And let's not forget the possibility of sudden combustion. More than one fashion magazine quietly reminds you to stay a respectful distance from open flames, lest you literally go up in style. As you soldier on, a maid hovers, occasionally brandishing a comb, or, in dire circumstances, a small pair of scissors. Hairpieces and rats, little pads of fake hair, are always on standby, ready to bulk up what nature or an overzealous curling iron has left behind. The final product: a mountain of curls, meticulously arranged, poked and shellacked with everything from beeswax to sugar water. If you sneeze, it might all collapse, so you practice shallow breathing and avoid sudden movements. Throughout the day, you are constantly on alert. Wind, rain, or an ill-timed hug could undo an hour's worth of work. Your hair is not just a style statement, it's a daily performance art, an ongoing battle against gravity, humidity, and the relentless pressure to look like you've just stepped out of a romantic oil painting. At dinner, you'll likely spend half the meal discreetly tucking stray tendrils back in place, and the other half pretending you don't notice the faint crackle of beeswax melting under the gaslights. But above all, Victorian hair is about hope. Hope that your curls hold, hope that you don't accidentally set your head ablaze, and hope that today, just maybe, you'll be the envy of the parlor, shimmering with enough shine to signal ships on the Thames. If all else fails, there's always tomorrow, and another round with the hot irons. Welcome to the ritual of hair, part beauty, part science, and mostly a test of willpower and upper body strength. Makeup is worn, but no one admits to it. The perfect look is, I woke up like this, after 2 hours of smearing wax, crushed beetles, and hope onto my face. Don't get caught reapplying, or you'll be the talk of the ton for all the wrong reasons. Let's set the scene. You're perched before your vanity, the morning light filtering in just enough to show every flaw, but not enough to actually help you fix them. The goal is simple: achieve a face so ethereal, so natural, that it looks entirely accidental and totally effortless. Never mind the fact that your natural look requires an arsenal of powders, rouges, pomades, and at least 3 brushes made from the tail fur of something extinct. The process begins with a layer of rice powder, worked in gently so as to not attract suspicion or set off a coughing fit. You pat, dust, and blend until your skin achieves the desired effect. Matte, smooth, and faintly resembling antique porcelain. If you get it right, people will assume you spent the night in deep, spiritual reflection, not deep in last year's leftover lead paint. Rouge comes next. This is the forbidden fruit of the Victorian beauty routine. Too much, and you're a trollop. Too little, and you risk being mistaken for a marble bust. A dab on each cheek is blended in with the tip of your finger, or, if you're feeling extravagant, a real brush. The shade? Ideally something that mimics the just barely alive flush you get from either a surprise proposal or a mild fever. Some ladies favor crushed flower petals or even the infamous carmine, made from actual beetles, because nothing says elegance like a subtle red glow courtesy of insect sacrifice. Your lips present their own challenge. Painted lips are a clear sign of moral decay, or at least, that's what your aunt would say. But going completely bare leaves you looking unfinished. The compromise? A discreet rub of pomade or the faintest trace of rouge, applied so carefully that you can plausibly deny everything. If anyone asks, you've just bitten your lips, the way one does when pondering poetry. Try to ignore the fact that you haven't read poetry since last spring. Eyebrows are brushed and, if necessary, darkened with a sliver of burnt cork or a bit of soot from last night's fire. Just don't overdo it, unless you're aiming for the startled opera villain look. Your lashes get the world's tiniest coating of homemade pomade, which keeps them perfectly glossy and ever so slightly stuck together. If someone notices, you simply blame it on last night's emotional reading of Jane Eyre. Now comes the critical moment: concealment. Not your blemishes, heaven knows, you've already done your best there, but the act itself. You must hide every trace of your artistry. Brushes and pots are tucked away, faces are blotted, and the room is discreetly aired to remove the scent of beeswax and crushed petals. If anyone, especially another woman, enters while you're mid-makeup, you immediately pivot to the old standby, just freshening up, never admit to anything more. The consequences of being caught? Social exile, endless whispers, and possibly a stern letter from your mother. In Victorian London, to admit to cosmetics is to admit to artifice, and to admit to artifice is to admit to ambition. That's dangerous territory. Instead, you cultivate a legend of natural beauty, secretly proud of your skills. Every time you catch your reflection, a little glow here, a subtle shimmer there, you know the truth. Behind every effortless face is a woman with steady hands, iron will, and a keen knowledge of what beetles are in season. So you face the day, cheeks subtly rosy, eyes demurely bright, lips naturally perfect. And if anyone asks how you look so refreshed, you just smile and say, "Oh, I hardly do anything at all." Meanwhile, you pray the rain holds off, because nothing melts faster than Victorian modesty. Thin, arched, and preferably invisible, Victorian eyebrows are a work of anti-art. Plucking is done with tweezers that double as torture devices, and if you overdo it, you can always pencil them back in with soot, no pressure. Let's begin at your dressing table, where the real battle of the brows commences. You sit, peering into a small, slightly warped mirror that magnifies every flaw but somehow ignores your best efforts. The goal is clear. Brows so insubstantial that they might vanish entirely if someone sneezes too hard in your direction. Victorian beauty manuals are adamant. Anything too lush or unruly is distracting or, worse, continental. The horror. Your tools are simple. A pair of tweezers resembling medieval dental equipment, a pot of soot, and a prayer. With the morning light pouring in, you steel yourself for another round of self-inflicted agony. Every hair must be tamed, removed, or, if fate is cruel, coaxed into the shape of a polite question mark. You pluck and wince, pausing occasionally to dab your watering eyes. There's no numbing cream, no ice, just the raw thrill of wondering if you'll still have brows by the end of the session. Of course, the trend is all about subtlety. So subtle that your eyebrows should look like they're on annual leave. The goal is to frame your eyes without actually framing them, a paradox that makes you question your life choices every single morning. If you're too enthusiastic and create an accidental bald patch, don't worry. There's always the family cure. Smudge a bit of soot or burnt cork into the gap and blend it in with your pinky. A little goes a long way. Too much, and you've entered the vengeful opera widow aesthetic, which, unfortunately, is out this season. It doesn't help that everyone around you is quietly judging your arch. Too thick? You're untamed. Too thin? You're ill. Perfectly symmetrical? You've clearly made a deal with the devil, or have been spending too much time in Paris. Victorian society loves nothing more than a beauty standard you can't actually achieve without either suffering or mild fraud. And don't even think about eyebrow pencils. Any hint of artifice must be denied at all costs. If you're caught shading or shaping your brows, you must immediately feign confusion. Oh, is that charcoal? How silly. I was just cleaning the fireplace. Mastering the look of innocence is an essential skill, as is quickly hiding any evidence of your eyebrow enhancement routine whenever footsteps approach. There's also the constant danger of weather-related disaster. A sudden London downpour could turn your carefully penciled brows into two tragic black rivers. Strong winds, your soot may simply migrate, giving you a look best described as Victorian raccoon. It's a delicate balance. And one wrong move, one sneeze, one nervous wipe of the forehead, and your secret is exposed to the entire drawing room. Social pressure is ever present. At gatherings, you'll catch other women glancing not at your eyes, but just above them, making silent calculations. Are those natural? Are they even there? Did she miss a spot? Rumors can fly fast. One cousin's slip of the tweezers can become family legend. If you're lucky, no one will notice, or they'll pretend not to. If you're unlucky, you'll spend the season explaining away a mysterious incident with a candle. Despite all this, you persevere. Tweezing, dabbing, blending, and hoping. You become an expert in the art of micro-expression, raising a single brow just enough to signal interest, but not so high as to reveal any patchiness. When all else fails, you pull a fringe of hair across your forehead and hope the fashion gods smile upon you. By the end of the ordeal, you may be red-eyed, slightly exasperated, and rethinking your commitment to beauty. But your eyebrows, those barely there, elegantly tragic little lines, are ready to face the world, or at least survive until the next bout of social scrutiny. Congratulations! You've survived another morning in Victorian London, where the real drama is written not in ink, but in soot-plucked hairs and the silent scream of tweezers meeting flesh. Getting dressed is a full-body workout. chemise, drawers, corset, petticoats, crinoline, overskirt, underskirt, bustle, bodice, jacket, shawl, gloves, hat, and sometimes self-loathing. You're basically one strong gust of wind away from being airborne. It all starts with the chemise, a deceptively simple whisper-thin linen shift that's supposed to keep your real clothes from ever touching your actual body. It doesn't. What it does do is bunch up under every subsequent layer, ensuring that you start the day with at least one thing itching, pinching, or riding up. Next are the drawers, long, split-legged affairs designed for modesty and, accidentally, maximum drafts. If you sneeze, the resulting wind tunnel effect could be studied by Victorian scientists for years. Then comes the corset, already described in loving, suffocating detail. Once your waist has been forcibly convinced to halve its natural diameter, it's time to start piling on the petticoats. There are at least two, but fashion and the weather might demand more. They rustle, scratch, and tangle around your ankles like a haunted curtain, picking up dust, pet hair, and the occasional small rodent if you stand still long enough. By now, you're not just dressed, you're upholstered. Now for the crinoline, a cage-like contraption of steel hoops and fabric, wide enough to claim territorial rights over several square feet of London real estate. Stepping into a crinoline is like volunteering for a low-level engineering project. If you manage to sit down without launching yourself across the room, you're already a pro. For a truly special occasion, you might wear a bustle, a sort of rear-end exclamation mark that guarantees you can't fit through normal doorways or ever lean back in a chair again. On top of your own personal scaffolding, you start adding skirts, plural. Always plural. Underskirt, overskirt, more petticoats, and finally, the actual dress, which weighs as much as a small child and costs more than most people's annual rent. Every layer is secured with hooks, buttons, ties, and the unwavering hope that you won't need the chamber pot in a hurry. But wait, there's more. Bodice, fitted so tightly that you must exhale in installments. Sleeves, which can range from dainty and fluttering to full wingspan of a moderately sized owl. Shawl, for modesty and warmth. Gloves, to hide the scandal of bare hands. Hat, to protect your complexion and advertise your social status in one feather-bedecked package. And let's not forget the jacket or mantle, which you'll inevitably lose or drop in a puddle, and which will be returned 3 months later by a cousin you barely remember. The whole process can take up to an hour, with the help of at least one maid and the moral support of a close friend or small crowd of onlookers. By the end, you're sweating, slightly dizzy, and already reconsidering your plans to leave the house. And all of this, for what? The chance to appear composed, delicate, and, above all, unbothered. Never mind that you've just survived a logistical nightmare that would send modern wedding planners into early retirement. Once you're dressed, movement becomes a strategic operation. Walking requires planning and the kind of spatial awareness usually reserved for champion chess players. Sitting is a negotiation with gravity and your internal organs. Stairs are to be approached with caution and, ideally, a spotter. God forbid you need to pick something up off the floor, that's a 3-act tragedy. But here's the magic. Step into a room, and your silhouette, cinched, puffed, and floating on a sea of tulle, broadcasts elegance, wealth, and utter commitment to the cause of looking like a beautiful, slightly frantic, very fashionable lampshade. You may be half an inch from heat stroke, but for a moment, you are the absolute picture of Victorian womanhood. Statuesque, mysterious, and just one brisk breeze from flight. Congratulations, you're ready to face society. Or at least, to stand very still and look magnificent until the first petticoat tries to strangle you. Victorian shoes are proof that elegance is pain. Pointy, pinchy, and featuring heels that double as torture implements, they're perfect for short strolls and long-term podiatry issues. Just try not to faint before you lace them up. Let's begin with the first challenge. Finding your shoes. They're probably hiding under a mountain of skirts, lost among the dust bunnies, or quietly plotting your downfall beneath the edge of your bed. When you finally track them down, you're greeted by the sight of delicate satin, shiny patent leather, or, if you're especially unlucky, a pair of sturdy boots that look like they were designed by someone with a personal grudge against feet. Victorian shoes are narrow, pointed, and made for feet that apparently only exist in paintings. If your toes are wider than a pencil, congratulations, you're in for a morning of creative folding. Stockings are pulled up and adjusted just so, because a visible seam could start a family scandal, and then comes the main event, coaxing your poor, unsuspecting foot into a shoe that hasn't been broken in since the Great Exhibition. Lacing is an exercise in patience, pain tolerance, and upper body strength. If you're lucky, the laces will hold. If not, you'll spend the next half hour crawling around on the floor, cursing under your breath and trying to rethread a shoelace through 18 tiny, invisible eyelets. Buttons are even worse. They require a special hook and the manual dexterity of a magician. If you've ever tried to fasten a button with gloves on, you already have an idea. Now do it while holding your breath and balancing on one leg in a corset. The heel, of course, is the final insult. These aren't modern heels with their suspiciously ergonomic designs. Victorian heels are tiny, precarious, and shaped like something you'd find on a torture device at the Tower of London. The higher the heel, the higher your social status and your likelihood of spraining an ankle on the cobblestones outside. Some shoes come with dainty ribbons that wind around your ankles, looking beautiful until the blood flow stops and your foot falls asleep in protest. You stand up. The world tilts. Your feet have gone from slightly tender to, is this what walking on hot coals feels like, within seconds? And you haven't even left the bedroom yet. Walking is a delicate shuffle, toes crammed together, arches unsupported, every step a reminder that Victorian fashion was not designed for speed or comfort. The sound of your shoes clicking across polished floors is the soundtrack of suffering, punctuated by the occasional yelp as a rogue pebble sneaks in under your sole. Shoes are rarely worn for function. In fact, practicality is seen as deeply suspicious. If your footwear looks comfortable, people will assume you're about to clean something or, worse, do actual work. The correct look is a shoe that hints at elegance and whispers irreversible damage. Rain? Mud? The omnipresent London fog? None of these are excuses to wear anything resembling a boot with proper tread. Instead, dainty slippers and paper-thin soles are the order of the day, just right for catching a chill or developing a lifelong limp. As the day wears on, your feet progress through the stages of denial. First, numbness, then a tingling ache. Finally, a persistent throbbing that you will later describe to your maid as simply the consequence of being fashionable. Blisters form alliances with corns and bunions. The most determined among your toes start to plot an escape. Of course, taking your shoes off is a ritual of relief and mild horror. You peel away layers of stocking, revealing marks, indentations, and the unique constellation of bruises and calluses that map out your journey through a single day of Victorian womanhood. Still, you dust yourself off, line up your shoes for tomorrow, and remind yourself that pain is temporary, but a reputation for shapely ankles is forever. Congratulations! You've survived another day in Victorian shoes. The bunions may last a lifetime, but at least your suffering is elegantly pointed. No outfit is complete without gloves to hide your scandalously human hands, a fan to signal boredom in Morse code, and a parasol, great for sun protection and poking people who stand too close. Let's begin with gloves, the most essential barrier between your delicate fingers and the judgmental eyes of society. Gloves are not just fashion, they're armor. Your hands, if seen ungloved, are basically Victorian scandal clickbait. Did you scrub turnips this morning? Have you got the faintest hint of a freckle? Are your fingernails just slightly the wrong shape? No matter. Slide on your kid leather gloves. Never mind that it's 85 degrees and you're sweating like a racehorse. The gloves must stay on at all times, except perhaps when eating soup, but even then, some women prefer to risk a ruined glove rather than risk exposure. Forget fingerprints. You could leave a crime scene with zero evidence, but the gossip would last forever. Fans are where subtlety meets tactical espionage. A fan isn't just for cooling yourself. It's a silent language, a coded system known to every woman in the room and, allegedly, no man. A flick of the wrist means you're bored. A snap means you're angry. A slow flutter might mean you're interested. And a sudden collapse could mean either heartbreak or that you've seen what Mrs. Livingston is wearing and simply can't go on. You practice your fan moves in the mirror. Bored, scandalized, delighted. I might faint or just need more toast. A fan is also a handy tool for eavesdropping, because nothing says I'm not listening like daintily hiding your entire face behind a screen of painted feathers. Now the parasol, a delicate, dainty umbrella that, in your hands, becomes both a portable shade and a personal boundary enforcement device. The sun is your enemy, at least if you care about maintaining your prized corpse glow, and a parasol is your best defense. It's lightweight, collapsible, and can be unfurled in a single, dramatic motion. Ideally, as you step out of a carriage or make a daring escape from an awkward conversation. The parasol's true power, however, lies in its passive-aggressive versatility. Someone stands too close in a crowd? Gentle prod. Someone's dog gets too familiar with your skirt? Defensive tap. Neighbor gets too nosy about your beauty regimen? Subtle barrier. You wield your parasol like a social ninja, staking out your territory one polite jab at a time. Of course, the etiquette surrounding these accessories is dizzying. Gloves must match not just your dress, but the mood and the occasion. White for balls, pale for morning calls, black for mourning, grey for ambiguous feelings about the weather. Fans are carefully chosen to complement your outfit: ivory for summer, painted silk for the opera, mourning black with a discreet hint of lace for funerals. Because nothing says rest in peace like the faint sound of board fluttering from the back pew. Parasols, meanwhile, come in an alarming array of colours and trims, all of which must coordinate with your hat, your shoes, and your carefully managed sense of decorum. Accessories aren't just about style, they're about survival. They hide, they signal, they deflect unwanted attention, and invite the right kind. You practice twirling your parasol in the mirror, snapping your fan just so, and sliding your gloves on and off with practiced grace. There's a rhythm to it all, a choreography that only your fellow Victorian women truly understand. By day's end, your hands are shriveled from sweat, your wrist aches from fan flicks, and your parasol has left a permanent indentation on your palm. But you've survived another round of Victorian accessorizing, artful, strategic, and a little bit absurd. The next time you see a period drama and wonder why everyone looks slightly exasperated, it's not the corsets. It's because accessories are hard work, and someone is always watching to see if you drop your fan. Your day involves visiting other women to exchange cards and judgments. The goal is to appear polite, unbothered, and absolutely exhausted by the entire ordeal. Bonus points for silent competitions over who can drink tea without making a sound. The morning social circuit is less a pleasant pastime and more an Olympic event in endurance, posture, and barely concealed psychological warfare. You start by assembling your calling cards, a tiny stack of engraved, cream-colored tickets to your own performance of Victorian respectability. Each card is your name, your address, and a carefully curated font that says, "I am both refined and intimidatingly well-connected." Lose your cards, and you might as well go back to bed. No one will know you exist. You step outside, swaddled in your layers, accessories arranged with mathematical precision, calling card case clutched tightly in a gloved hand. The carriage is waiting. Or if your family's fortunes are more precarious, it's a brisk walk, practicing the art of not tripping over your skirts while maintaining a facial expression that communicates equal parts mild amusement and silent suffering. Arriving at the first house is a social chess match. You hand your card to a butler whose own opinions of you could fill a novella, and wait to see if the lady of the house is at home. Sometimes she is. Sometimes you're diplomatically told she's indisposed, which might mean she's peeking through the curtains, judging your hat from a safe distance. If she receives you, it's time for tea, small talk, and the world's slowest verbal fencing match. The conversation dances around the weather, the latest news about the Queen's dog, and mutual acquaintances who, conveniently, are not present to defend themselves. Tea is poured with the kind of care normally reserved for laboratory experiments. Not a single drop must be spilled, and under absolutely no circumstances are you to slurp, sigh, or, heaven forbid, guzzle. You raise your cup, pinky strategically unfurled, and listen as someone brings up the scandal at last night's ball, which, of course, you are far too polite to comment on, but absolutely plan to dissect later in private. Each house is a new test of endurance. You're shown into drawing rooms that smell of lavender, new wallpaper, and suppressed ambition. You admire the new furniture, feign interest in the latest embroidery, and make vague promises to call again soon. Sometimes, your hostess offers cake, which is both a trap and a test. Eat too quickly, and you're branded greedy, refuse, and you're snubbing her hospitality. You nibble daintily, all the while making mental notes on whose parlour is dustiest and whose daughter is a little too old to be wearing pink ribbons. Occasionally, you encounter a rival on her own circuit. There's a subtle nod, a flash of a half-smile, and a lightning-fast assessment of who is better dressed, whose fan is newer, whose shoes squeak the least. Points are silently awarded and deducted for posture, hat feathers, and conversational grace under pressure. After making the rounds and collecting more gossip than you'd admit under oath, it's finally time to escape. You return home with your own pile of calling cards, some new invitations, and an entire menu of topics for after-lunch dissection with your mother, sisters, or confidant. You are exhausted, not from actual effort, but from holding your face in the precise position between amiable and I wish I were anywhere else. The morning's social circuit is finally over. Your reward? The smug satisfaction of surviving another day of polite warfare, and the knowledge that, for one more afternoon, your reputation is intact, or at least no worse than anyone else's. Congratulations. You've mastered the art of the Victorian cold shoulder and can now retreat to your fainting couch with a sense of social accomplishment, if not inner peace. Running a Victorian home is an Olympic sport. You're in charge of the staff, the budget, the linens, and whether anyone ever opens a window. Just don't actually do any work. That's for the help. Unless you're middle class, in which case, surprise, you are the help. The day begins with the rustle of starched skirts and the distant clatter of pots in the kitchen below. You sit at your writing desk, armed with a ledgers, a stern look, and an endless to-do list. Your job is to ensure that everything runs smoothly, or, at the very least, that the chaos is disguised by fresh flowers and strategically placed antimacassars. The entire house is your kingdom and your prison, and every floorboard creak is a reminder that you are both queen and chief inspector. First, the staff. If you're fortunate, your home is alive with a full cast. The cook, the parlour maid, the scullery maid, the butler, the footman, and the ever-elusive girl who does the steps. Each one must be managed with a deft touch and a working knowledge of human psychology. Too friendly, and they'll walk all over you. Too stern, and you'll be known as the household tyrant. Every instruction is an exercise in diplomacy. Please make sure the silver is polished to a shine. But also, don't use up the last of the polish. Also, if the soup is salty again, I will be forced to have feelings about it. You do not lift a finger, not in public anyway. Your hands are for directing, not doing. If a guest arrives unexpectedly, you spring into action, directing the maid to answer the door, summoning tea, fluffing pillows, and rearranging your expression to delighted, not desperate. Your reputation depends on the illusion of effortlessness, even if it means sprinting upstairs to hide your actual effort. But behind the scenes, you're part detective, part therapist, and part traffic controller. Where is the missing candlestick? Why are there footprints on the stairs? Why does the milkman keep winking at the housemaid? These are the mysteries that fill your mornings. Now, if you are not fortunate, if your family's finances are closer to aspirational than actual, then you do it all yourself. The help is you, and your workday is an unbroken relay race. Washing, ironing, dusting, cooking, and then pretending none of it happened when your mother-in-law calls. The iron is heavy, the soap is lye, and your hands are proof that softness is for the idle rich. You manage the budget down to the farthing, cutting recipes in half and inventing creative uses for stale bread. Burnt the roast? That's charred in the French style. Short on sugar? We're simply being virtuous. And then there's the relentless audit of everything. Are the curtains clean? No. Are the towels folded? Rarely. Is the coal scuttle full? Never when you need it. Your life is a continuous loop of checking, double-checking, and then rechecking when you find a half-eaten bun under the settee. You keep track of household expenses with the precision of a tax inspector: coal, soap, lamp oil, potatoes, candles. Woe betide the household that runs out of any of these essentials. Your entire sense of self-worth now depends on your ability to keep a pantry stocked and a fireplace burning, even if both are down to crumbs and embers. And let's not forget windows. Opening one is a strategic decision involving weather, health, and propriety. Too much fresh air and you're inviting illness, or, worse, gossip. Too little and the house smells like boiled cabbage and existential despair. By evening, you are exhausted. You've maintained the illusion of domestic bliss, soothed tempers, managed crises, and still found time to embroider a handkerchief that you'll never actually use. You may never leave the house, but you've steered it through another day, sometimes as a goddess, sometimes as a warden, always as a survivor. Congratulations, you're the glue, the engine, and, occasionally, the only thing standing between your home and complete, glorious chaos. Bathing is a rare, dangerous event involving tin tubs, boiling water, and a high probability of being walked in on by the entire household. Soap is mostly lie and bravado, and shampoo is for the wealthy or the delusional. First, you have to declare your intention to bathe well in advance, preferably in writing and possibly with a bribe to the housemaid. Bath day is a logistical miracle. The tin bath must be fetched from wherever it's been exiled. The shed, the attic, or possibly another dimension, dragged with much clanging into the kitchen or a cold bedroom, and wiped out to remove last month's mysterious residue. Your best hope is that whatever left the stain is no longer alive. The next step is water, gallons and gallons of it, hauled up in heavy buckets from the pump, or, if you're especially unlucky, the nearest well or river. The kitchen is filled with the sound of boiling, sloshing, and the distinct scent of almost hot enough to hurt. The water is poured into the tub with a satisfying splash and a cloud of steam, which quickly turns to icy mist if anyone opens a door or a window within a 2-block radius. There is no privacy. You'd think a bath would entitle you to some time alone, but the concept doesn't really exist in Victorian households. At any given moment, someone will barge in to fetch a mop, discuss the price of turnips, or simply express horror at your bare ankles. The actual washing process is a form of self-flagellation. The soap, a homemade brick of lye and animal fat, is less a gentle cleanser and more an exfoliating ordeal. You rub, you scrub, and you try not to inhale the scent of eau de barnyard. It stings. It doesn't really lather. It leaves your skin suspiciously squeaky and slightly red, if you're lucky. If you're not, you may spend the next few days explaining away a mysterious rash. Shampoo? Only if you're either upper class or in possession of a dangerous sense of optimism. Most hair is cleaned with the same soap that's just stripped your skin of 3 layers, and your scalp is left tingling in a way that's definitely not invigorating. Water temperature is a race against time. The first pour is scalding. 10 minutes later, it's cold enough to test your resolve. There's always the hope that someone will reheat the kettle and top you up. But more often than not, you're left huddling, goosebumped, and trying to remember if Victorian pneumonia is still fashionable this season. Drying off is another adventure. Towels are thick, coarse, and designed to remove not just water, but any remaining hope of feeling pampered. You wrap up, shiver, and try to ignore the fact that the bathwater, now a sad soup of soap and sorrow, will be reused for at least 1 or 2 more family members before being dumped out the nearest window, sometimes onto unsuspecting pedestrians. Sorry, Mr. Pemberton. You emerge, pink-skinned, exhausted, and smelling faintly of boiled sheep. Congratulations. You are now the cleanest person on your street. For at least an hour, or until you have to haul more coal, wrangle the family dog, or step outside into the perpetual drizzle of Victorian London. But don't get used to it. Bathing is a special occasion, like birthdays or surprise visits from judgmental relatives. The rest of the week, you make do with a wash-up at the basin, a quick splash of cold water, a frantic scrub with a mostly dry rag, and a spritz of lavender or, in times of desperation, a good hard prayer. Cleanliness, in Victorian London, is less a state of being and more a fleeting achievement. If you manage it at all, wear it with pride, because tomorrow the tin tub will be gone, the soap will be missing, and you'll be right back where you started. Layered in lace, dignity, and a faint but persistent whiff of lye. When water won't cut it, perfume comes to the rescue. Scents range from lavender and rose to London fog, smoke, sewage, and anxiety. Just pray your fragrance is stronger than the city's natural aroma. The truth is, by midday, you're fighting a losing battle against the ambient bouquet of Victorian London. Coal smoke drifting from every rooftop, a generous helping of horse, and the tangy zest of last week's fish market. Your nose twitches. Your eyes water. If you're lucky, there's a brief moment just before you step outside where your own scent is the dominant one. It won't last. Your arsenal begins with a row of glass bottles, each filled with some hopeful blend of flowers, herbs, spices, and the faintest whiff of chemical optimism. You reach for the lavender, grown in someone's distant garden, and carted across muddy roads to end up on your vanity. A dab behind the ears, a splash at the wrists. Don't forget a spritz on your handkerchief. The universal Victorian tool for fending off everything from unpleasant encounters to actual plagues. If you're feeling adventurous, maybe you try rose water, which promises romance but delivers the olfactory punch of a grandmother's hope chest. But let's not kid ourselves. Perfume, in this era, is both mask and armor. It must outlast a commute through the pea-souper fog, withstand the embrace of Aunt Millicent, who smells suspiciously of camphor and regret, and hold its own against the all-consuming scent of damp wool. Some of the more daring concoctions promise to invigorate the senses, which is code for please God. Make it so I can't smell my neighbors. In your purse, a tiny vial of cologne being the closest thing Victorians have to hand sanitizer. A quick dab before entering crowded rooms, especially the parlor, where the air is thick with equal parts gossip and mildew. You master the discreet touch-up. A flick of scent just before the door opens, a wave of the handkerchief beneath your nose when the conversation turns to politics, or worse, to the latest cholera scare. Fashion magazines of the day are full of advice. Don't overdo it. A lady's scent should be delicate, never overwhelming, which is a lovely idea if you happen to live somewhere other than London, 1862. Here, the rule is simple. If your perfume doesn't announce you before you enter a room, it's already failed. If it doesn't linger after you've left, it never really existed. Of course, you still have to pretend modesty. Oh, just a little rose water, nothing more, as if your entire toilette wasn't designed to outlast a coal barge. Of course, not all scents are equal. The wealthy favor imported blends, jasmine, sandalwood, the mysterious musk. Source, don't ask, you won't like the answer. The aspiring middle class settle for anything floral and French-sounding, even if it's mostly alcohol and wishful thinking. The less fortunate mask their scents with a strong cup of tea and a good brisk walk downwind. Occasionally, the perfume itself is more dangerous than the odors it's meant to conceal. Some formulas include mercury or turpentine, making irritated skin one of the more common Victorian fashion statements. Still, the effort continues. You waft through your day in a cloud of scent, sometimes pleasant, sometimes questionable, always necessary. If you pass another woman on the street and catch a whiff of violets or verbena, there's a secret, shared nod. I, too, am just trying to survive. By the end of the day, your perfume has faded, overpowered by the city itself. But for a few fleeting hours you were a walking garden, a defiant sprig of lavender in a world that smells like wet coal. You wash your face, lay out your scent bottles for tomorrow, and dream of a world where fresh air doesn't smell like progress. Victorian dieting is about eating just enough to stay conscious, but not enough to risk a healthy glow. There are endless recipes for cabbage, water, vinegar, and self-restraint. Carbs? Only if you want to be mistaken for the cook. Breakfast was already an exercise in moderation. Toast thin enough to read through. Tea that could legally be called water, and perhaps a single slice of orange if you were feeling reckless. But as the day unfolds, the real challenge begins. How to maintain the ideal of fragile delicacy without actually fainting into the coal scuttle. The ultimate goal is a silhouette that would be described in today's language as ethereal, but in reality is just one strong breeze away from disappearing entirely. You start with lunch. The options are uninspired. A bit of clear broth. Cabbage water, the favorite beverage of Victorian ascetics. Or, if you're daring, a poached egg. Hearty stews and thick slices of bread are strictly for servants, children, and women who have already accepted a future as someone's sturdy aunt. If you so much as glance at a scone, your mother may fix you with a look so sharp it could slice through butter, if butter were even allowed in your diet. Portion control is an Olympic sport. Every meal is a performance, complete with strategic arrangement of food on the plate, discreet shuffling to make it look like you've eaten more than you have, and the classic "I'm simply not hungry after yesterday's indulgence," a whole potato. If you must eat in public, you become an artist of refusal. "Oh, no cake for me, thank you. I couldn't possibly," followed by a longing glance at the dessert tray and a silent prayer for willpower. Of course, the secret weapon in every Victorian's weight control arsenal is vinegar. Health magazines and society pages rave about its miraculous properties, suppressing appetite, clearing the complexion, and, allegedly, burning off those unsightly extra ounces accumulated from a single grape. Many a hopeful socialite has sipped a glass of diluted vinegar, only to spend the afternoon trying to ignore the twin sensations of heartburn and regret. For special occasions, there are even patented diet pills, little more than chalk, powdered rhubarb, or, in some alarming cases, sanctioned doses of arsenic. Lethal? Possibly. Effective? Well, it certainly makes you lose your appetite. Cabbage, meanwhile, is the silent hero of the Victorian menu. Cabbage soup? Cabbage salad, raw cabbage leaves wrapped around. Wait for it, more cabbage. The smell alone is enough to make you question every decision that led to this moment. If cabbage fails to satisfy, you might move on to gelatin-based treats designed to wobble enticingly while providing exactly zero nutritional value. As the day wears on, your mind drifts inevitably toward forbidden foods. Warm bread, dripping with butter, a thick wedge of cheese, a tart so bursting with fruit it almost glows in the dim light of your parlor. These are not for you. Instead, you make do with self-restraint, an extra glass of water, and perhaps a few grapes arranged artfully on a saucer. It's not just food, though. Even your attitude toward hunger is policed. Looking too enthusiastic about supper could mark you as uncouth. On the other hand, refusing everything might make you seem ill, which, ironically, is just as fashionable. The sweet spot? Appear slightly peckish, faintly tragic, but never, ever robust. By evening, you are both hungry and victorious. You've nibbled, sipped, and politely declined your way through another day of avoiding nourishment, all in the pursuit of that ideal Victorian waif look. You slip into bed, stomach rumbling softly, proud of your delicate self-denial. Tomorrow, the cycle begins anew. Remember, beauty fades, but hunger, at least in Victorian London, never goes out of style. Forget the gym. Victorian exercise is about delicate strolls, swooning gracefully, and the occasional calisthenic movement designed to keep your figure in check without any actual sweating, which is considered both indecent and suspicious. Start your day by looking out the window and assessing the weather. Is it slightly overcast, a bit damp, and mildly uninviting? Perfect. Time for a constitutional. The Victorian version of a workout involves donning 3 layers of clothing, a hat the size of a pie plate, and possibly gloves, all to take a gentle promenade down the avenue at the world's slowest speed. The aim is to appear both active and utterly unbothered, which requires immense core strength, given the added weight of social expectation and the literal ironmongery of your corset. Your walk, or stroll, is less about fitness and more about being seen. You drift past neighbors with a serene expression, nodding faintly and keeping your pace somewhere between glacial and nearly stationary. Each step is measured. Too fast, and you'll be accused of unladylike enthusiasm. Too slow, and you risk being mistaken for a statue, which, given the amount of starch in your skirt, isn't out of the question. Should you feel a sudden rush of air, also known as breeze, it's best to stop, fan yourself delicately, and look vaguely concerned for your health. This is an ideal opportunity for a feint, or at least a brief sit-down on a conveniently placed bench. Fainting isn't just allowed, it's encouraged. A gentle collapse communicates refinement, fragile nerves, and, most importantly, an unwillingness to engage in anything resembling effort. For the truly ambitious, there are calisthenics, a word that covers a multitude of sins, from waving your arms in circles to flexing your ankles beneath your skirts. Magazines offer diagrams for ladylike exercise, featuring movements so subtle they could be mistaken for stifling a yawn. You might be told to stretch your limbs upon rising, which involves lifting your arms halfway before remembering that your sleeves don't allow for such decadence. Some households possess exercise equipment, like dumbbells that weigh less than a family scone, or a wooden hoop for graceful revolutions around the garden. The hoop is mostly for show. If anyone saw you actually using it, you'd have to claim temporary insanity or French ancestry. Of course, the main source of daily exertion is household management, which, should you be unfortunate enough to lack an army of servants, requires bending, stooping, and the occasional chase after a rogue chicken or a truant child. But none of this counts as exercise, since perspiration is strictly off-limits. If anyone accuses you of breaking a sweat, Simply claim the room is overheated. Or you've just received distressing news about a distant cousin. Social gatherings offer their own version of exercise, the quadrille, the waltz, or, for the daring, the polka. Dancing is permitted as long as it remains graceful and doesn't result in visible exertion. Partners are carefully chosen to avoid too much enthusiasm. God forbid anyone mistake your joy for aerobic activity. At the end of the day, you can take pride in your routine. A few slow laps around the garden, a discreet feint, and a series of highly ambiguous stretches in your dressing room. Your complexion remains delicately pale, your hair unruffled, and your corset mercifully intact. You've maintained the illusion of health without risking the disgrace of an actual workout. Congratulations, you are the very picture of Victorian fitness. Upright, composed, and slightly faint at all times. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. One dainty step at a time, all in the name of beauty, reputation, and never, ever breaking a sweat. Dental care is experimental at best. Powders made of burnt bread, charcoal, or chalk. Toothaches are cured by a trip to the barber surgeon, who will cheerfully remove your tooth and half your hope. Your morning begins with the ritual of brushing your teeth, a generous term for what is, in reality, a process of enthusiastic scrubbing with a homemade concoction. The options for toothpaste are as varied as they are alarming. Some recommend a powder of crushed oyster shells. Others swear by a blend of burnt breadcrumbs and a hint of mint for the rich or those hoping to attract a particularly optimistic suitor. Charcoal is popular, as are brick dust, chalk, and even a little salt if you're feeling brave and don't mind bleeding for beauty. The brush itself is a masterpiece of Victorian engineering, featuring boar bristles jammed into a wooden handle that could double as a small weapon. Each pass over your teeth feels like a negotiation between hygiene and gum recession. There's a constant internal debate: scrub harder for cleanliness or risk looking like you just chewed on a fireplace. Either way, the taste is best described as regrettable. Still, you persevere, because having white teeth is a sign of health and refinement, at least it would be if anyone actually achieved it. The goal is simple: avoid the worst of the dental disasters that haunt your social circle. Mrs. Willoughby at number 9 lost half her teeth last year and can only eat boiled carrots. Miss Prentice had her front tooth knocked out by a rogue piece of hard biscuit and now wears a porcelain replacement that whistles when she laughs. Of course, all the brushing in the world can't save you from the Victorian diet. Sugar is everywhere, hidden in cakes, preserves, and those mysterious little lozenges Aunt Mildred insists are good for the nerves. Combine that with weak tea and bread, so dense it can only be described as geological, and your enamel is fighting a losing battle. Toothaches are inevitable, and with them comes the dreaded moment when you must seek help. Enter the barber surgeon, a man who can trim your bangs, set your broken arm, and, most crucially, remove any offending tooth with a pair of iron tongs and the bedside manner of a particularly cheerful executioner. Anesthesia is a distant dream. If you're lucky, you might be offered a splash of brandy or a whiff of chloroform, if the barber is feeling modern and you look like you can pay for it. Otherwise, you grit your teeth, the ones you have left, squeeze the arm of a chair, and try not to scream louder than the neighbor's parrot. The process is simple. The offending tooth is gripped, twisted, and yanked, often in one enthusiastic motion that leaves you temporarily cross-eyed and permanently distrustful of anyone holding pliers. Afterward, you're given a handkerchief for the bleeding and a stern warning not to fuss. If infection sets in, you may be treated to a poultice, a prayer, and, in extreme cases, a gentle reminder that God loves you and everyone must go sometime. For those with money or a talent for self-delusion, there are false teeth. Porcelain, ivory, or even a set carved from the teeth of deceased relatives. No, really, that's a thing. These are held in place with wire and hope, prone to falling out at the worst possible moments. Weddings, funerals, punchlines. Still, you do your best. You rinse, you powder, you avoid the hardest crusts and the chewiest toffees. When all else fails, you smile with your lips closed and your chin held high, confident in the knowledge that no one, absolutely no one, is getting through the Victorian era with their full set of teeth. Congratulations, you've survived another day in pursuit of pearly. Not quite. Whites. Tomorrow, it all begins again. The brushing, the wincing, and the desperate hope that dental science will one day invent Novocaine. It's not just about looking perfect for yourself. Your value on the marriage market is ranked somewhere between able to play the pianoforte and has not yet fainted at dinner. The ideal wife is beautiful, obedient, and slightly mysterious, possibly from hypoxia. Let's begin with your most important social event, being appraised. It happens everywhere, all the time. A dinner, a garden party, a casual stroll in Hyde Park, any occasion can become an audition. As a Victorian woman, you're both the product and the window dressing, expected to stand, sit, and breathe in a manner that's simultaneously alluring and unthreatening. Smiling too broadly, unseemly. Laughing too much, dangerous. What if you get ideas? A single unguarded snort and you could be branded unmarriageable by next Tuesday. Your daily routine has prepared you for this moment. Every hair is shellacked into place. Your waist is cinched to the diameter of a soup can, and your expression hovers between pleasantly receptive and on the verge of delicate collapse. Your cheeks are dusted for maximum pallor, your gloves pristine, your posture vertical enough to signal, I have good breeding and minimal opinions. When you enter a room, you do it with just enough hesitancy to be adorable but not so much as to appear lost. It's a dance. And you are, unfortunately, the music as well. Let's review the checklist. Can you play the pianoforte, sing a little, or perhaps embroider a handkerchief with your eyes closed? These accomplishments are essential, not because your husband will care, but because his mother definitely will. You might also be expected to dabble in watercolors, recite poetry in 3 languages, and perform the sort of needlework that leaves your fingertips permanently pricked. Remember, every hobby is less about self-fulfillment and more about creating the world's most decorative resume. Now, about obedience. Modern relationships may thrive on partnership and communication, but in Victorian London, the hierarchy is clear. The husband is in charge, and your job is to look delighted by this arrangement. You're expected to listen to stories about politics, railways, and cricket, with a rapt expression and the ability to feign interest for up to 3 hours. If he asks for your opinion, it's a trick. Offer it only if it aligns perfectly with his, or if you can deliver it while looking charmingly confused. Oh, I'm sure you know best. Dearest is a phrase that can get you through almost any conversation and most minor household emergencies. Mystery is the final and perhaps most vital quality. The perfect Victorian wife never reveals her true thoughts. She cultivates an air of delicate secrecy, a touch of melancholy that hints at untold sorrows, or possibly just chronic lightheadedness from the corset. A little silence goes a long way. If you ever feel compelled to reveal an actual opinion, do it in a whisper, while gazing pensively out a window. The less you say, the more fascinating you become. According to the fashion, a woman's true feelings are like her ankles. Best hinted at, never displayed. Of course, passing the husband test is not a guarantee of happiness. You may find yourself judged for things utterly outside your control, your complexion, your ankles, even your ability to faint without causing a scene. Your worth is tallied in dowries, family reputation, and how convincingly you can look thrilled by a discussion of agricultural yields. Still, you endure. You perform, you smile, you blush on command, and if you're lucky, you catch the eye of a man who prefers poetry to profit and who just maybe thinks for himself. But for most, marriage is not about love, but about survival, status, and, ideally, someone who won't mind if you occasionally pass out during dinner. Congratulations, you've navigated another day of the husband test. The performance is ongoing, the stakes never lower, and the hope, like your corset strings, just barely holding together. Reputation is everything. One fashion misstep, one untimely pimple, or an ill-advised letter, and you're out. Maintaining the illusion of perfection requires constant vigilance, quick reflexes, and the ability to smile through existential panic. Every day in Victorian London is a high-stakes game of reputation roulette. You wake up, already playing defense against potential disasters. Did your hat get crushed by the maid? Is your lace less than perfectly starched? Did you accidentally wear summer gloves before Whitsun? Any one of these could mean instant exile, from dinner parties, from polite society, or, worst of all, from the next big charity bazaar. You peer at your reflection, searching for blemishes with the intensity of a jewel appraiser. Heaven forbid a pimple appears on your chin, clearly a sign of moral failing or possibly bad blood, neither of which you want circulating through the social grapevine. Step outside, and you enter the gauntlet. Neighbors peek from behind curtains, exchanging silent signals about your latest hemline. Is it too short? Too long? Too last year? You smile serenely, projecting an air of effortless composure while inside, you're replaying every conversation you've ever had with Mrs. Blakely to check for accidental slights or comments that could be misconstrued and weaponized. Social calls and parties are minefields. The parlor is thick with perfume and, more dangerous still, the scent of gossip. Conversations are laced with compliments that might actually be insults. "My dear, what a daring shade of ribbon." Or, "You always look so comfortable." Every gesture is scrutinized, every word dissected for hidden meaning. You nod, you sip tea, and you desperately try to remember which cousin eloped, which sister is indisposed, and which neighbor mysteriously changed hair color overnight. The rules shift hourly, and you must always act like you know them by heart. But it's not just about you. One mistake from a family member, a friend, or even your household staff, and you're swept up in their scandal by association. Did your brother gamble away the family savings? Did the cook flirt with the butcher's assistant? Are you hiding a cousin with revolutionary opinions and an unfortunate mustache? All fair game for the rumor mill. The best you can do is stay ahead, keep the curtains drawn, and cultivate the air of someone too boring to warrant suspicion. Letters are particularly treacherous. The wrong note, dropped or intercepted, could spell disaster. You develop handwriting so delicate and ambiguous that only the most determined aunt could decipher your intentions. Anything even vaguely flirtatious or political must be written in code, burned, or, best of all, never written at all. Still, there's always the fear that one awkward billet doux will surface at the worst possible moment, read aloud in mixed company by someone with a grudge and a flair for dramatic pauses. Sometimes the threat comes from within. Maybe you catch yourself yawning at the wrong moment. Or, heaven forbid, laughing too loudly. Both can be interpreted as signs of poor upbringing or questionable breeding. Did you trip on a cobblestone? It's not clumsiness. It's a symptom of delicate nerves. Do you dare to go outside with a cold sore or worse, a smile that reveals slightly yellowed teeth? Prepare for a month of sidelong glances and whispered speculation. In the end, it's about survival. You smooth your skirts, pin your hair, and carry on, layering small talk over insecurity, dry wit over dread. Your only true allies are the women who know exactly what you're enduring and can commiserate in the safety of the cloakroom. Together, you exchange coded glances, share stories of minor disasters, and support each other through the endless, exhausting process of just trying to keep up. Congratulations. You've made it through another day in the arena of social survival. Your reputation, for now, remains intact, and your ability to smile through the existential panic of Victorian high society deserves an award, if only awards weren't so easily misinterpreted. Tea time is more than a meal. It's a blood sport. Conversations are coded, cakes are dangerous, carbs, and you never know when someone will slip in a backhanded compliment with your scone. The hour approaches, somewhere between the slow decline of the afternoon and the earliest permissible moment to break out the good china. Your stomach is rumbling, but so is your sense of dread. Afternoon tea is an exercise in strategy, social climbing, and dietary acrobatics. It's where alliances are formed, vendettas are aired, and reputation is built or ruined, all over delicate cups and suspiciously small sandwiches. You arrive precisely on time, because being early is desperate and being late is practically criminal. You are greeted by a hostess who seems delighted to see you, though you're not entirely sure if her smile is genuine or just the side effect of her third cup of Darjeeling. The room is thick with the scent of rose water, lemon cakes, and unspoken tension. Tea is poured, daintily, by someone who has practiced the art of not spilling a single drop. You watch as the sugar is passed, 1 lump or 2, 3 lumps, and you might as well declare yourself a radical. Milk is carefully dribbled in, the color of the tea scrutinized as if it's a secret code. The first sip is crucial. Too hot and you wince, too cold and you look ungrateful. There is apparently a correct facial expression for mild pleasure, with an undercurrent of spiritual suffering. You practice in the mirror, but it never looks quite right. Now comes the food. Tiny sandwiches, cut into shapes that are more mathematical than nutritional, make the rounds. You are allowed 1, 2 if you want people talking about you for weeks. There are cakes, but each crumb is a test. Take too much, and you'll be whispered about as greedy. Take none, and you're cold, unfeeling, perhaps hiding a dangerous secret. Nibble, smile, and try not to think about the endless rounds of cabbage water that await you later to balance out this momentary indulgence. The true spectacle, though, is the conversation. Every sentence is a riddle, every compliment a trap. Your dress is so original, could mean anything from "you're a daring trendsetter" to "did you lose a bet?" The older ladies deliver these verbal grenades with the skill of seasoned duelists. You learn to counter, "Oh, thank you, it was my grandmother's. I so admire tradition." Politeness is your shield, but never drop it. Behind the lace and lace doilies, everyone is armed to the teeth. Rivalries bubble just beneath the surface. Someone brings up a recent charity ball, and there's a collective inhale. Everyone remembers who danced with the vicar a suspicious number of times and who was unwell in the garden just after dessert. You keep your eyes down but your ears open, scanning for the faintest sign of scandal that might be repackaged as concerned conversation later in the week. The social ladder is climbed one well-placed anecdote at a time. If you're clever, you can insert yourself into every conversation without ever looking like you're trying. The trick is to sound faintly wistful and a little bit tired, as though you have endless interesting secrets, but not enough energy to actually tell them. At the end of tea, you rise, patting your lips with a napkin, making sure not to leave a single crumb on your dress. Your hostess walks you to the door, where another round of farewells is exchanged, each one more loaded than the last. As you leave, you're already replaying the afternoon in your mind, dissecting every word, every gesture, every bite. Congratulations! You survived another Victorian afternoon tea, battle-hardened, subtly sabotaged, and only slightly hungrier than before. Tomorrow, the whispers begin in earnest. But for tonight, at least, you've lived to sip another day. The world is watching, and so is your aunt. Wardrobe malfunctions can end a season, and daring to wear a French cut could land you in hot water with the vicar. Just pray your petticoat doesn't rebel mid-curtsy. Every trip outside is a fashion gauntlet, and you never know who's lurking behind a curtain or peering through a lorgnette, ready to sound the alarm at the first hint of impropriety. You stand before the mirror, running through a mental checklist. Gloves on, hat pinned, stockings secured, petticoat behaving itself, not trying to make a break for it under your skirt. A single loose ribbon, or heaven forbid, a slightly sagging hem can spell disaster. Immortalized in the whispered legends of church bazaars and parlor games for seasons to come, your primary adversary is the wind. London is full of surprises, but nothing is quite as consistent as the city's ability to produce a gust just as you step out onto the street. 1 minute, you're a vision of decorum; the next, your bonnet has taken flight, your skirts are in disarray, and your petticoat is waging a one-woman mutiny. There are horror stories, local legends really, of young ladies whose underpinnings gave way mid-curtsy, revealing more than just good breeding to an entire drawing room. The cure? Never move too quickly. Always check for loose ties. And, if you must sneeze, do it in private. Then there's the question of cuts and colours. The French are the perennial scapegoat for every daring trend. A slightly lower neckline, a scandalous shade of blue, a skirt just short enough to show a glimpse of ankle if you trip on the stairs. If you're feeling especially bold, you might experiment with something continental. But beware. Your aunt, your vicar, and the entire ladies' auxiliary are ready to pounce. Wear the wrong thing to the wrong event, and you'll find yourself at the center of a moral panic that makes the daily papers. Buttons are your silent saboteurs. They pop at the most inopportune times, flying across the room like tiny missiles. Hooks and eyes misalign themselves just when you need to look composed, leaving you one sigh away from structural collapse. The threat of a ripped seam hovers over every chair, every sudden movement, and every ill-advised second helping at supper. If disaster does strike, your options are limited. A discreet dash to the powder room, a whispered plea to a friend with a sewing kit, or, worst of all, a forced improvisation involving a borrowed shawl and a look of serene resignation. Let's not forget the ever-watchful eyes of other women. The matriarchs and mavens of society are experts at cataloguing each detail of your attire. They spot an out-of-date trim from 50 paces, can detect a repaired tear in the faintest candlelight, and will never let you forget that you once wore last season's sleeves to a christening. Compliments are suspicious, silence is ominous, and a collective gasp means someone just broke an unspoken rule. Then there's your family. No one is more invested in your sartorial success or more prepared to critique your every thread. Your mother smooths imaginary wrinkles, your younger siblings pull at your ribbons, and your aunt offers unsolicited advice on what's becoming, which always means less fun than you hoped. Your final mirror check is less about your own taste and more about surviving a day without giving anyone an excuse to pen a strongly worded letter. Through it all, you persevere, walking, sitting, and even curtsying with the poise of someone who knows one wrong move could end her social season. If nothing falls off, blows up, or becomes a sermon illustration, you count it as a victory. Congratulations, you've survived the Victorian fashion police. For now, at last, you can unlace, unwind, and remove 12 pounds of hairpins, but don't get too comfortable. There's still the nightly beauty regimen, cold creams, more powder, and prayers for clear skin. The day's final act begins with a great sigh. The kind that signals both relief and the existential dread of realizing you'll have to do this all again tomorrow. You retreat to your bedroom, a softly lit sanctuary lined with mysterious little jars, boxes, and combs. The first order of business is disassembly. Layer by exhausting layer, you peel away the armor of Victorian womanhood. The shoes go first, with a sound that is half gasp, half prayer. You wiggle your toes, grateful to feel blood return to your feet. Next, you unbutton, untie, and finally wriggle free from your corset. That architectural marvel and mortal enemy of lung capacity. As the laces slacken, you can finally take a real breath. One that fills your lungs all the way down and briefly tricks you into believing you might actually survive until morning. Then come the skirts. You untangle petticoats, overskirts, underskirts, and the omnipresent crinoline, which you hang like a conquered adversary over the back of a chair. Each layer removed reveals new evidence of the day's struggle. A stray bobby pin, the faint ghost of a grass stain, a button hanging by a thread. You finally reach the chemise, the last defense against the world, and collapse onto your bed, feeling about 5 degrees lighter and slightly closer to freedom. But victory is short-lived. The nightly beauty routine awaits, a sacred and slightly absurd ritual. You cleanse your face with cold cream, rubbing it in with a circular motion that promises to draw out impurities, or at least smear the day's remaining soot across your cheeks. You wipe it away with a soft cloth, inspect the damage, and contemplate a second pass. Next comes rose water or cucumber tonic, applied liberally to any area that feels particularly battered by society, the weather, or your own expectations. Hair is a saga all its own. You sit before your vanity, carefully removing pins, combs, and any decorative birds that might have taken up residence during the afternoon. Each pin is dropped into a dish with a satisfying clink, while you marvel at how your scalp survived another day without permanent damage. You brush your hair, 100 strokes, the magazines insist, for maximum gloss, minimum split ends, and just enough upper body strength to feel like exercise. Hands are next. You rub them with lemon juice, almond oil, or whatever you can find to reverse the indignities of tight gloves, raw soap, and the occasional flirtation with actual housework. A dab of powder at the nose, a careful check for rogue eyebrow soot, and a strategic spot of salve for that one pimple determined to ruin your week. All this is done by the faint glow of candlelight, which is flattering, forgiving, and unlikely to reveal any flaws you can't fix by morning. Now, you change into a nightgown, voluminous, ruffled, and about as seductive as a bedsheet, but it's the freedom that counts. Before bed, you kneel for a brief prayer, asking for good dreams, clear skin, and mercy in the morning. The last thing you hear is the ticking of a clock and the gentle shifting of linen. As you slip beneath the covers, you feel the day's weight finally lift. Your face is clean, your hair is free, your ribs are allowed to expand, and your feet, at long last, are warm. You have survived another day as a Victorian wife, layered, lacquered, and still, somehow, yourself beneath it all. Tomorrow, the fortress goes back up, but tonight, you are at peace, at least until someone invents a better mattress. Love in Victorian London is equal parts strategic partnership and high-risk game. Romance is best conducted via meaningful glances, coded letters, and, if you're feeling rebellious, a brisk walk without a chaperone. Let's set the scene. You're at a crowded ball, the air thick with perfume, the sound of waltz music echoing off marble walls. You stand by a pillar, clutching your fan, and trying not to make eye contact with anyone's mother. Across the room, a certain someone dares a glance in your direction. You allow yourself a fleeting look, just enough to send a jolt of anticipation through both your hearts and to make 3 elderly aunts whip their heads around, squinting for evidence of impropriety. This is courtship, Victorian style, a chess match with your future as the grand prize, and your every move monitored by an entire league of unpaid, highly motivated detectives. The mechanics of Victorian romance are baffling by modern standards. Love letters are essential, but never straightforward. Every word is a code, every phrase carefully selected so it can be explained away should it fall into enemy, parental hands. The garden is lovely this time of year might mean meet me at the rose arbor at dusk. While I trust your mother's health is improving translates to I long to see you, but your mother is always watching, and frankly, I'm terrified. But don't get ahead of yourself. Even receiving a letter is risky. The mail is unreliable. The household staff are nosy. And younger siblings are always ready to blackmail you in exchange for sweets or a promise to look the other way during hide and seek. Should a letter fall into the wrong hands, there will be consequences, discreet, devastating, and, in the case of Aunt Hester, involving a 3-hour lecture on the dangers of poetic expression. Actual conversation is rarer still. Chaperones hover like vultures over every tea table, ready to swoop in at the first sign of flirtation. Topics are limited: the weather, the Queen's health, and, if you're feeling particularly bold, the latest improvements in carriage suspension. If you manage to exchange 3 uninterrupted sentences about the garden, congratulations, you're basically engaged. Physical contact? Dream on. A gloved hand resting on a sleeve might set off a cascade of whispers that lasts until Michaelmas. A shared dance is a high-wire act. One misstep and your partner will be exiled to a lesser colony. One too many smiles and you'll both be immortalized in the local vicar's next sermon on temptation. Still, some hearts are too daring to be contained by etiquette. That's where the thrill of the elopement comes in. The ultimate act of romantic rebellion, elopement is a last resort for those denied love by parents, circumstances, or the aforementioned Aunt Hester. Plans are made in hushed tones. Meeting at dawn by the old oak tree, a borrowed carriage, a forged note to explain your absence. Gone to visit cousin Edith, back by supper. The stakes are enormous: disgrace, disinheritance, a life in exile, or, with luck, a thrilling new start and a reputation for wild romance that will keep you in whispered stories for years. Of course, not every elopement ends in bliss. Sometimes the runaway couple is intercepted by a furious parent. Or, worse, the family solicitor. Sometimes the happy pair realizes, halfway to Gretna Green, that they can't actually stand each other. But for every cautionary tale, there's a legend: the couple who risked it all, survived the scandal, and lived on in a small cottage filled with laughter, minor regrets, and an impressive collection of intercepted letters. So you navigate love in Victorian London with the precision of a jewel thief. Every glance calculated, every word rehearsed, every risk weighed against duty and the ever-watchful gaze of society. If you manage to win both happiness and a half-decent reputation, you're a legend in your own lifetime. And if not, at least you got a few good dances and a handful of dangerous letters out of the bargain. For every beauty problem, there's a terrifying solution. Laudanum, arsenic wafers, opium-based sleep aids, and the ever-present risk of turning into a medical footnote. Natural remedies include anything you can find in the kitchen or the garden, with questionable results. Let's begin with the morning inventory, your aches and pains. Your head is pounding from the lingering aroma of last night's perfume experiment. Your back is still recovering from 12 hours of corset-induced architectural reshaping, and your feet have filed an official complaint with your ankles. But fear not. Victorian medicine stands ready with a dazzling array of solutions, each one more alarming than the last. First up, laudanum. This magical elixir, equal parts opium and brandy, is advertised for everything from headaches to heartbreak, menstrual cramps to existential dread. A teaspoon with tea will numb the senses, soothe the spirit, and, if you're not careful, leave you gently drooling on the antimacassar. It's socially acceptable, widely prescribed, and has the added benefit of making awkward family dinners much more bearable. Side effects? Only if you consider occasional bouts of unconsciousness a downside. Then there are the arsenic wafers. Those mysterious little pills promising a flawless complexion and the gentle glow of impending doom. Society columns are full of testimonials, I take one with every meal, and my skin has never looked more translucent. Never mind the nausea, dizziness, or the sneaking suspicion you might be slowly embalming yourself from the inside out. A beautiful corpse, after all, is the ultimate Victorian compliment. For those troubled by restless nights, there are opium-based sleep aids, available at your local apothecary and recommended by every doctor whose handwriting you can't read. A drop or two before bed, and you'll drift off, dreamless and blissful, completely unaware of the street sweepers, the howling dogs, and your neighbor's nightly piano practice. Just be careful not to overdo it, or you might wake up in another century. But the pharmaceutical arsenal doesn't end there. Suffering from female hysteria, the doctor prescribes rest, fresh air, and perhaps a gentle application of electric currents, applied to the temples, of course, and not at all alarming. Got a nervous rash or a mysterious cough? Try inhaling the steam from boiling onions, or dabbing your wrists with camphor spirits. If that fails, you can always soak your feet in mustard water, wrap yourself in flannel, and hope for divine intervention. For the determined do-it-yourselfer, natural remedies offer an exciting range of home experiments. A little honey for sore throats, a poultice of bread and milk for boils, raw potato slices taped to your forehead for headaches. If you can grow it, stew it, or borrow it from your neighbor's garden, it's probably worth a try. At the very least, you'll keep yourself occupied until the real doctor arrives, or until the pain subsides of its own accord. Of course, self-medication isn't without risk. A simple attempt to cure a spot of indigestion with patent medicine might result in uncontrollable hiccups, or, in rare cases, a brief but memorable hallucination involving talking wallpaper. The average Victorian household boasts a cabinet of tinctures, powders, and salves, most of them unlabeled, all of them ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. Half the fun is remembering which bottle is for sleep and which one might cause an explosive result. By the end of the day, your aches remain, but you're armed with the grim optimism that comes from surviving another round of Victorian medicine. You tuck yourself into bed, a hot water bottle at your feet, a whiff of menthol in the air, and the gentle knowledge that at least tomorrow you can try a different remedy. After all, if it doesn't kill you, it might just make you interesting enough to be mentioned in the local paper. Congratulations, you're still standing, mostly, and living proof that a little arsenic, a pinch of opium, and a lot of creative hope can get you through almost anything. Victorian self-care, risky, resourceful, and never, ever boring. After a day of tightly regulated suffering, it's time for beauty sleep, if you can find it beneath layers of lace and self-doubt. Tomorrow, the whole performance starts again. Sweet dreams. And don't let the moral panic bite. Your nightly retreat begins with exhaustion, both physical and existential. You slip into your nightgown, a billowing fortress of ruffles designed to preserve modesty and simultaneously tangle you in its voluminous folds should you dare to shift position in the night. You settle onto a mattress that is technically stuffed with what? You're not entirely sure, but it squeaks and sighs beneath you, an audible chronicle of every restless night and anxious nap. Before you close your eyes, there's one last check. Hair braided to avoid knots, a touch of powder, just in case, and your trusty handkerchief tucked beneath your pillow for emergency dabbing of night sweats or midnight tears. Somewhere nearby, your prayer book waits, because a little divine intervention is always helpful when tomorrow brings the risk of petticoat disasters, fashion scandals, or breakfast with your mother-in-law. You do your best to relax, but sleep does not come easy. The room is quiet, but your mind races. Did you remember to thank the hostess for tea? Was your petticoat actually visible when you sat down at the piano? Did you say good evening to Mrs. Linton? Or was that just a fever dream brought on by the vinegar diet? These are the pressing anxieties that haunt the Victorian mind long after the candles are snuffed. And then there are the physical aches. A gentle reminder that beauty is never effortless. Your ribs ache from a day in the corset, Your feet throb from shoes designed more for appearance than anatomy, and your face is stiff from an evening spent smiling at precisely the right angle. You turn, you sigh, you rearrange your pillows in pursuit of the perfect, ladylike sleeping posture, and still your mind refuses to settle. Outside, the city of London never quite sleeps. Hooves clatter on cobblestones, street vendors shout the last of their wares, and somewhere a neighbour's baby reminds you that there is always a greater misery just a thin wall away. Even the night air, thick with fog and faint coal smoke, seeps in through cracks in the window, gently smothering your dreams with the scent of urban progress. When sleep does arrive, it's a patchwork quilt of anxious dreams and fleeting victories. You dream of lost gloves, crumbling bonnets, and the eternal judgment of other women's raised eyebrows. Sometimes you're pursued by the ghost of a fashion faux pas, sometimes by your own mother, armed with a measuring tape and a monologue about your posture issues. If you're lucky, your subconscious will conjure up the blissful fantasy of running through a field in trousers, bareheaded, scandalously free, and then you wake with a start, clutching at your nightcap. Yet, in the strange twilight before dawn, you find a kind of peace. The world is quiet, your skin is free of powder, your feet are warm, and you remember that despite everything you've survived another day. The laughter with a friend, the shared look of solidarity with another woman at tea, even the minor triumph of a hairpin perfectly placed, these small victories matter. As the first light slips through the window, you steel yourself for another round. The day's performance will begin anew, with all its rituals and absurdities. But for now, you lie in the embrace of your lumpy mattress, and the knowledge that you, resilient and resourceful, have weathered every storm of fashion, etiquette, and existential dread the Victorian world could throw at you. Good night, sleep tight. And remember, if you hear the distant echo of gossip or the faint whisper of a wardrobe malfunction in your dreams, just roll over and remind yourself you made it through today. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Victorian London loved a good tragedy, especially if you could dress for it. Morning attire wasn't just black. It was blacker than your ex's soul and twice as itchy. There were strict rules. Full mourning, half mourning, quarter mourning, and possibly still sad but tired of lace mourning. Every ruffle, crepe veil, and gloomy bonnet was a public statement that yes, you are grieving. And yes, you're willing to die of heatstroke rather than risk looking cheerful at the wrong time. The moment news of a family death reached your household, the first response wasn't always tears, it was panic about wardrobe logistics. Out came the mourning manuals, ready to dictate exactly what shade of black and how many layers of crepe were appropriate for a second cousin, step-uncle, or parakeet's passing. God help you if you misjudged the depth of your grief by showing up in lavender too soon. The neighbours would notice, and Mrs. Chudley across the street was always prepared to keep a mental tally. You start with full mourning, the strictest and most suffocating of all grief-related costumes. This meant jet black dresses, matte black crepe veils covering your face and half your breathing ability, and layers upon layers of fabric calculated to absorb both tears and perspiration. No jewellery, unless it was made of jet, onyx, or perhaps woven from the hair of the dearly departed. No shiny buttons, certainly no colour. Not even white, unless you fancied being accused of secret joy. You were allowed to speak, but only in hushed tones, and smiling was reserved for the bravest or most scandalous among your peers. Meals were just as dreary, the table set with sombre linens, flowers banned in favour of wilted ivy, and menus featuring the most uninspiring, colourless fare imaginable. Socialising? Absolutely not. Unless you count sitting in a dimly lit room pretending to read letters of condolence from relatives you couldn't remember. The mourning period could last a full year for a spouse, 6 months for parents, and as long as the next fashion cycle for more distant relations. Half mourning came as a relief. a tentative re-entry into the world of the living. Here, you could add a splash of grey or a cautious bit of lilac. And maybe, if you were feeling particularly bold, a brooch that wasn't funereal. People would whisper, "She's starting to move on," and secretly take notes for their own eventual emergence. Even in half-mourning, social events were limited to the most joyless. Church services, charitable visits, and conversations about the weather. By the time you reached quarter mourning, you were practically radiant with your hints of white or mauve. Suddenly, you remembered what sunlight felt like, even if your skirts were still more suited to absorbing Gothic poetry than vitamin D. Quarter mourning was, in essence, the slow, careful dance back to normalcy, one pastel ribbon at a time, but always with an air of apology, as if happiness might sneak up and find you before you were ready. Throughout the process, your attire was both shield and signal. It kept you cocooned from prying eyes, but also marked you as emotionally available for every kind of unsolicited sympathy, neighborly gossip, and distant cousin's matchmaking attempt. Heaven forbid you smile at the wrong time or, worse, be caught laughing at a joke. Instant suspicion that you'd been faking it all along. The material realities were even harsher. Crepe was scratchy, hot, and notorious for holding on to every unpleasant odor in a London summer. Veils collected dust, caught on doorknobs, and made every breath a little heavier. The ritual of mourning was physically as well as emotionally draining, a marathon of melancholy, sartorial discipline, and perpetual dampness. When your period of mourning was finally up, there was no triumphant shedding of black. You eased back into color cautiously, one grey sash or navy glove at a time, checking the mirror and the street for any sign of judgment. But beneath the layers of ritual and fabric, you emerged with the deep, weird pride of someone who'd survived not just loss, but also a full year of living like the world's most fashionable shadow. You might think your closest confidant is your husband or your diary, but it's actually the person who's seen you at your worst. Your lady's maid. She's there for every unflattering hair moment, every corset mishap, and every failed attempt at eyebrow pencil. She knows your secrets, and so does her cousin's friend, and probably the butler. Because privacy is an urban myth when there are 16 people living in the same house. Your day and your dignity begins and ends with your maid. Before dawn, she's already in your room, moving with silent efficiency and just enough attitude to let you know she's seen it all before. She brings hot water, sometimes actually hot, lays out your layers of clothing, and wordlessly assesses the damage your sleep has done to your hair. There's a faint, knowing glint in her eye as she wields her brush and begins the daily transformation. You try not to take it personally when she sighs at the latest tangle or lifts your hair with the resignation of a seasoned battlefield medic. Dressing is a two-person sport, requiring a trust deeper than most marriages. She laces your corset, pulling just tight enough for fashion, but not so tight that you'll pass out before breakfast. One wrong tug and you're left breathless. One loose knot and you risk a wardrobe malfunction that will be the talk of the entire servants' hall. You both know the stakes. There's a certain choreography to it all. She anticipates your movements, hands you pins and perfume, and fixes your bonnet with the expertise of someone who has prevented more social disasters than any etiquette manual ever could. But a lady's maid is more than a silent partner in your morning routine. She's the guardian of your reputation. And sometimes, the greatest threat to it. She's heard every panicked confession, witnessed every emotional meltdown, and knows exactly who sent you those slightly daring letters last spring. You may try to maintain the illusion of control, but one sideways glance from your maid says it all. She knows what really happened to the missing brooch, why you suddenly took ill during last month's supper, and which cousin you can't stand. This intimacy comes at a price. While she's sworn to discretion and has more to lose than you if the truth comes out, The walls in your house are thin, and her alliances stretch far beyond your bedchamber. Your secrets may travel at the speed of gossip through servants' corridors, passed along with a knowing wink and perhaps a bribe of extra jam at tea. The butler knows more about your love life than your parents ever will, and the housekeeper could blackmail half of Mayfair if she felt so inclined. Still, your maid is your greatest ally. She smooths over your mistakes, slips you a peppermint when your breath betrays your cabbage diet, and offers brutally honest advice about what dress will actually flatter your complexion. When your nerves are frayed by yet another disastrous family dinner, she's the one who brings you a calming tonic and a look that says, "You'll live." On the days when everything goes wrong, hair frizzes, corset laces snap, shoes vanish mysteriously, she's your lifeline. Sometimes, she even lets you believe it's all going to be fine, if only for a moment. The relationship is part friendship, part business arrangement, part very delicate truce. You depend on her, and she depends on your discretion too. After all, you've overheard more than a few whispered plans for a forbidden night out, a secret visit to the bakery, or a budding romance with the footman. At the end of the day, when you're stripped of fashion and pretense, your maid helps you unwind and gently reminds you that, beneath it all, you're only human, just one with better access to cold cream and slightly more existential dread. Together, you survive Victorian society. Partners in secrets, in style, and in the silent, knowing glances exchanged as the world demands perfection. But your hair refuses to cooperate. Mother Nature never took a holiday. But the Victorians pretended she could be silenced with a few layers of wool, a heavy petticoat, and a stiff upper lip. Menstrual products were, at best, a gamble. At worst, a public relations nightmare. If you were lucky, you had homemade cloth pads and enough privacy to deal with things. If not, you became very interested in the art of distraction, and possibly fainting dramatically whenever anyone asked if you felt unwell. Let's talk about periods, the topic Victorian London would do anything to avoid, even as it upended the lives of half its population every single month. Silence was golden, but sometimes the effort to keep everything secret was almost more exhausting than the ordeal itself. You begin the week with a sense of trepidation. Is this the month everything will go smoothly, or will your petticoats betray you at the worst possible moment? There are no commercials for freshness, no little blue droplets on linen. There is only the relentless march of time, and a profound, collective agreement to pretend nothing is happening. If you're fortunate, your mother, or, failing that, a shockingly blunt aunt, has equipped you with a stack of homemade cloth pads, squares of old linen, flannel, or whatever is handy, layered and laboriously sewn. If you're truly well off, you might have access to the elusive sanitary belt, a contraption of elastic and wire, more suited to a mad inventor's laboratory than your underwear drawer. For most women, it's improvisation and hope. Pads are pinned in place, adjusted discreetly throughout the day, and washed in secret. Laundry day becomes an exercise in stealth, timing, and the ability to keep a straight face when questioned about all that soaking and scrubbing. Leaks are your greatest enemy, followed closely by social disaster. If you sense a problem, your only recourse is the artful exit, suddenly remembering you promised to help in the kitchen, a feigned cough, or, if necessary, an unscheduled faint in the drawing room. No one can question your motives, and the more dramatic the swoon, the less likely anyone will ask you to elaborate. Pain relief is primitive, at best. Hot bricks, herbal teas, and a stern talking to from your grandmother about the dangers of overindulgence in excitement. Some recommend laudanum, others a brisk walk in the garden. Never mind that you're bundled in half the linen closet and would rather not risk a public accident in the rose bushes. The very idea of female complaints is so taboo that any sign of discomfort must be disguised. You keep smiling, keep bustling about, and pray no one asks why you seem a little pale. Fashion, naturally, makes things worse. The solution to every feminine challenge is, predictably, more layers. Woolen undergarments and heavy petticoats, great for warmth, terrible for ventilation, combine with the subtle torture of the corset to create an environment best described as humid. Anything less than stoic acceptance risks whispers and sideways glances. The ideal Victorian woman glides serenely through her monthly ordeal, never complaining, never wincing, and certainly never letting on that anything biological is happening beneath the silk and crinoline. And heaven forbid anyone in the household discovers your secret stash. Brothers are forbidden to enter the laundry room, and even the maid, sworn to discretion, might accidentally gossip about the unusual quantity of linens to the cook. The best defense is a good offense. Elaborate excuses, decoy laundry, and a well-practiced air of innocent distraction. By the end of the week, you're exhausted, both from the effort of concealment and the very real, unspoken pain. But you survive. You've navigated the perils of laundry, fashion, and fragile male egos, all while pretending you're just a little tired from all that reading by candlelight. With any luck, the household remains blissfully unaware, and you can breathe easy, at least until next month, when the entire charade begins anew. Congratulations! You've mastered the art of Victorian menstruation, equal parts endurance, improvisation, and Oscar-worthy performance. Sleep well, and may your petticoats and your secrets stay firmly in place. From rubbing raw beef on freckles to sleeping with slices of cucumber strapped to your face, Victorian beauty hacks ranged from mildly questionable to potential cause of Victorian-era salmonella. Every woman knew at least 6 rituals to prevent wrinkles, ward off blemishes, and protect against being labelled unfortunate-looking by Aunt Agatha. Science had left the building, folklore was running the show. You begin your evening beauty routine with a sense of adventure and a hint of dread. Somewhere between your cold cream and that suspiciously gritty powder labelled complexion whitener, you recall the latest bit of advice whispered by Mrs. T. If you rub a raw potato on your face each night, you'll never age a day. You're not convinced? But in a world where Aunt Agatha measures your worth by the elasticity of your cheeks, you'll try anything once. The Victorian era is positively marinated in beauty myths. Have freckles? Cover them with lemon juice. Just don't go outside, or you'll end up with what polite society calls an unfortunate rash. Blemishes? Cut a sliver of raw beef and dab it on the spot before bed. It's cooling, they say, and keeps the skin young. It also keeps your room smelling like last Sunday's roast and attracts the kind of attention you do not want from the family dog. For wrinkles, the options are nearly endless. Nightly massages with goose fat, the careful application of cold water mixed with rose petals, or, for the truly bold, a homemade mask of egg whites, vinegar, and hope. There's always someone claiming to know the ancient secret to ageless skin, and that secret usually involves something found in the larder or something you're definitely not supposed to put on your face. But desperation breeds creativity, and before you know it, you're inventing a 10-step routine that leaves you feeling more salad than siren. Your hair is no less a victim. To encourage growth and shine, fashion magazines suggest bare grease, rum, or even a mixture of onions and honey. This concoction is said to work wonders, provided you don't mind smelling like a fruit stand at closing time. And if you're unlucky enough to suffer from thinning hair, you can always turn to the classic Victorian solution. Sleep with a silk scarf tightly wound around your head and repeat the phrase "hair today, gone tomorrow" 3 times for good luck. Even your nails are subject to folklore. Want them to grow strong? Soak them in warm milk? Or, if you trust Mrs. Hargreaves, trim them by the light of the new moon and whisper your beauty wishes to the stars. You do this not because it makes sense, but because not doing it means facing the wrath of every elderly relative with an opinion and a memory longer than your laundry list. Of course, there are cautionary tales. Everyone knows of at least one girl who tried a rejuvenating soak in vinegar and rosewater, only to emerge looking as if she'd been attacked by a swarm of bees. Or the cousin who tried to bleach her complexion with French arsenic powder and spent the season behind a veil recovering her nerves. But even as these stories circulate, the myths persist. Because, in Victorian London, the alternative, being ordinary, is far more terrifying than a little raw beef on the pillow. Through it all, you follow your nightly routine, part science, part séance, and part desperate attempt to keep up with whatever advice is circulating in the drawing rooms this week. If all else fails, you can always blame any beauty mishaps on the curse of the family freckles or the unkindness of the moon. Congratulations! You've survived another day and night of Victorian beauty superstition, unscathed, unwrinkled, and hopefully unmarinated. Sleep well, and may your dreams be free of lemon juice, uncooked beef, and the eternal shadow of Aunt Agatha's opinion. So, here you are, back in your own time, free from corsets, crinolines, and the existential fear of ankle exposure. You've survived a day in Victorian London, a world where a woman's beauty routine was a full-time job, and social death lurked in every slightly crooked bonnet or daringly visible wrist. Tonight, as you settle into your soft, elastic waist pajamas and stretch out in a bed that doesn't require 12 servants or a minor engineering degree, spare a thought for the Victorian women who lived, and sometimes fainted, their way through a maze of beauty standards that would terrify even the boldest influencer. Remember, these women weren't just playing dress-up. They were navigating a society where reputation was everything, and perfection was a moving target set by people who thought cold cream was a cure for almost anything, including heartbreak, and possibly smallpox. They squeezed themselves into shapes no human skeleton should attempt, dusted their faces with chemicals that doubled as pest control, and learned to wield a parasol like a weapon against both the sun and unsolicited opinions. But underneath the layers of starch, etiquette, and occasional lead poisoning, there was an astonishing resilience. Every awkward curtsy, every disastrous hairdo, and every moment spent dodging public scandal is a quiet testament to the stubborn hope and creativity of people who found ways to laugh, gossip, and survive, one fainting couch at a time. So tonight, as you tuck yourself in, maybe send a silent thank you to those who came before, who suffered so we could eventually invent sweatpants, dry shampoo, and the blessed hoodie. Because history may be ridiculous, but it's also a reminder that beauty is fleeting, comfort is underrated, and the only standard that really matters is whether you can drift off to sleep with a smile. Good night, and may your dreams be free of corsets, bad hair days, and unsolicited beauty advice. Sleep well.